Russia, China, England, and even Japan have tried to compete for the US's crown of world's largest economy over the last century. They have all failed for many reasons. However, the US has one unbeatable advantage over all its competitors. It's something so simple that you may have never heard it on a central bank update or State of the Union speech. Yet it's so fundamental that it has boosted the American economy ever since it was discovered. A tiny handful of countries share this benefit, but none are big enough to take full advantage of it. Others have spent billions and fought wars to do so, with no success. So, what is it? To find that out, we'll go right back to the beginning. Christopher Columbus famously introduced America to most of the world, but that wasn't his original plan. He had been searching for a western route to East Asia, Japan, China, India, etc. This would have been incredibly valuable to him, his backers, and Spain. In the past, and until Magellan succeeded where Columbus had failed, arduous trips over land and sea voyages of many legs were the only ways to trade with the Far East. The ability to bring valuable goods like spices back across the sea from the east would have changed the world, making the discoverer and their nation incredibly powerful. Instead, Columbus discovered a group of islands that he called the West Indies in error, followed by America. It wasn't until a couple of decades later, when Magellan circumnavigated the globe in 1520, stopping in the far south of America and East Asia on the way, that Columbus's goal would be achieved. As Spain laid claim to much of Central and South America over the ensuing decades, it enjoyed almost exclusive control of this western route from Europe and Africa to East Asia, as well as the ability to trade with both from the new continent. This state of affairs continued until the early 19th century, when the foundation of Oregon Country by British and American settlers gave these nations trading access to the Pacific Ocean as well as the Spanish. This was formalized by the Treaty of 1818, which gave both nations equal trading rights until 1846, when a second treaty gave the territory exclusively to the U.S. This meant that the country spanned North America from the Pacific to the Atlantic, enjoying direct sea trade across both oceans. This is a benefit that almost no other country on Earth has enjoyed between the mid-19th century and now. Part of the reason for this was that in the meantime, Spain's domination of Central and South America was falling apart. Argentinian and Colombian independence in 1810 sparked a series of revolutions throughout Spanish America over the next 20 years. Spain's complete loss of mainland America meant that from the 1820s until today, the US and Canada are the only two nations to benefit from having ports on the coast of the Pacific and the Atlantic with uninterrupted land between them. This meant that as the US developed from a budding land of pioneers to the world's biggest economy, it could trade quickly and easily with Europe's developed markets and fuel the growing hungry Asian countries with exports. As roads and railroads allowed for quicker trade across the continent itself, the U.S. could also fulfill Columbus and Magellan's dreams of connecting the two huge, varied markets. This in itself was a hugely valuable undertaking that would become even more economically rewarding as technology cut down trading time and costs. This growing advantage was amplified by the fact that the countries of South America began to fall into poverty in the 100 years after they gained independence. Gran Colombia, the U.S.'s potential competitor, broke up, and other countries with Pacific and Caribbean ports suffered a number of political, military, and economic hardships. After half a century of poor political leadership, Mexico would lose Texas and cede California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico to the U.S. Along with internal impoverishment, this shrank the largest Central American nation's status as an economic and trading competitor in Northern America. As this was happening, rail tracks were racing across the U.S. at an astounding rate. While they were never really laid as fast as a man could walk, they did hit 10 miles in one day in 1969, an amazing feat that has never been beaten since. There has been a lot of talk in the movies of going after gold and taming the Wild West with railways. The real reason to remember these achievements of transportation, though, is that they linked the east and west coasts of the U.S. like never before. As the first transcontinental railroad or Central Pacific Railroad opened in 1869, it reduced the length of a journey from New York to San Francisco to a fraction of its former length. As well as changing the internal economy of the U.S., it formed the final link in a direct modern trade route from Europe to Eastern Asia, making the U.S.'s geographical position as facilitator of trade even more valuable. Columbus's dream of a direct western trade route from Europe to East Asia was finally made true just over 3 centuries after the continent of America got in the way. And this was only the beginning of America's domination of East-West trade. Starting in the latter half of the 19th century, Chinese and Japanese immigrants flocked to Western America over the Pacific Ocean, helping the emerging labor economy to grow much more rapidly. In fact, a good portion of those who built the Transcontinental Railroad were Chinese laborers, who are recognized by the U.S. Department of Labor for their contribution to the dangerous project. According to the CPRC, Chinese labor proved to be Central Pacific's salvation. Before we explore this in more detail, do you think that immigration can be the salvation of a growing economy? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on global conflict insights. As immigration from East and West grew, the USA's labor economy and innovation grew industry. Imports gave way to exports. In the Gilded Age at the end of the 19th century, America began to take its place at the head of the world economy. Rocketing wages attracted skilled workers, while industrialization and the spread westward allowed the U.S. to tip its trade balance toward exports and develop from a frontier economy to a world leader. During and after the World Wars, the newly developed U.S.'s position between Europe and Eastern Asia became even more strategically valuable. A hungry and devastated Europe sat across the Atlantic in need of food, raw materials, fuel, and equipment. Meanwhile, the USA quickly formed a close alliance with its old enemy, Japan, which was equally devastated but in need of a consumer economy to export to. Thus, America, seen as the savior of Europe and the enemy of Japan, contributed to the recovering European economy while consuming the output of a burgeoning Japan. In the process, the country built close relationships with the UK, Germany, and France, as well as becoming Japan's #1 ally. Of course, no review of the US's export markets is complete without a mention of its oil products, which have been its trade output from the middle of the century to this day. While it has never been a clear world leader in terms of oil reserves, the U.S. has always had better geographical and political connections to developed markets than its competitors in the Middle East and South America. Here's a little throwback to all those wars for independence in the early 19th century. By the 1970s and 80s, Japan had undergone an industrial and technological revolution, as spectacular as the U.S.'s was a century earlier. Thanks to the country's focus on hard work, innovation, and education, it led the world in semiconductor or computer chip exports, as well as the home of many electronic innovations, including the videotape, CD, DVD, modern LED display, and flash drive, making it a go-to for all kinds of computer technology. Think of Nintendo, Sony, Fuji, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, Panasonic, and Toshiba, and you will think of Japan's dominance of world electronics. On the other side of the world in Europe, infrastructure projects like Concorde, the Channel Tunnel, and the German reunification transport projects made Europe a grateful receiver of U.S. exports. Meanwhile, the public were falling in love with electronics, from the VHS to video games. In this situation, it was relatively easy for U.S. companies to import cheap chips and computer parts from Japan and use them to create the devices that Europeans were growing to love, not to mention their own compatriots. The only problem with this plan was the Japanese companies themselves, who offered highly effective competition. Meanwhile, continuing oil exports kept the American economy on track, despite some surface tensions. Cut to the 20th century, and China's rise to become the second largest economy in the world. Fortunately for the U.S., most of its seaports sit just the other side of the Pacific. Perhaps "just" is a bad phrase here, But the two super economies have formed the world's largest trading partnership, providing huge boosts to both. Tensions abound in the U.S. about China gaining more from this than the U.S. But once again, America enjoys access to the Pacific and Atlantic trading economies, the latter of which China lacks. This is seen by some as a major motivation behind the Road and Belt Initiative, one of the world's largest infrastructure projects, designed to place China at the center of a huge trading network. Despite this, the U.S. remains the largest trading economy in the world. It seems certain that the country's position between the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean is central to this. Today, the country enjoys direct trading access to almost all of the world's major developed markets. As such, its gross domestic product of $29 trillion remains over $10 trillion larger than China's as of Q1, 2024. As China's growth staggers, it looks like this state of affairs will remain for the immediate future. Governments and growth spurts come and go, but geographical advantages remain. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe for more deep dives like this. Let me know in the comments, how much do you think the U.S. benefits from access to Pacific and Atlantic trade? Thanks for watching.